The chandelier cast diamond-like patterns across the marble floor of the Rodriguez mansion as Marcus adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time. His reflection in the gilt-framed mirror showed a man who had everything: sharp Italian suit, perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, and the cold confidence that only came from crushing everyone who had ever dared to cross him. Tonight, he would add one more victory to his collection. "She'll come crawling back, just like I planned," Marcus spoke into his phone, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Sarah thinks this is a reconciliation dinner for the sake of old times. She has no idea what's waiting for her." On the other end, his current wife Vivian's laughter tinkled like breaking glass. "Darling, you're absolutely diabolical. The poor thing probably thinks you've grown a conscience after all these years." Marcus turned from the mirror, walking across the sprawling living room where staff moved like shadows, arranging flowers worth more than most people's monthly rent. Crystal glasses caught the light, each one positioned with military precision on tables draped in silk. The entire scene was orchestrated theater, and Sarah Martinez, soon to be humiliated beyond repair, was the unwitting star. "Conscience?" Marcus chuckled, swirling the amber scotch in his crystal tumbler. "The only thing I've grown is tired of her pathetic existence casting a shadow over my success. Tonight, I finish what I started 5 years ago." The memory of their divorce still brought him a savage satisfaction. Sarah, once his equal in ambition and intelligence, reduced to nothing. Stripped of her dignity, her home, her future. He had made sure of that. The prenup his lawyers had crafted was a work of art, a legal masterpiece that left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter taste of betrayal. "Marcus, you know I adore your ruthless side," Vivian purred through the phone. "But remind me again why we're bothering with this charade. Why not just leave her in whatever hole she's crawled into?" Marcus's eyes darkened as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling gardens beyond. "Because destroying someone once isn't enough, darling. You have to make sure they stay destroyed. Sarah's been too quiet these past few years. Too absent. I need to see her broken completely, in front of everyone who matters. I need to remind this city's elite exactly what happens when someone tries to challenge Marcus Rodriguez." The truth was more complex, though he'd never admit it to Vivian. Sarah's disappearance from their social circle had left an odd hollow in his chest, not from missing her, but from missing the satisfaction of watching her suffer. He'd grown addicted to the power he'd wielded over her during their marriage's final months, the way she'd flinch when he raised his voice, the devastation in her eyes when she'd discovered his affair with Vivian. Her absence had robbed him of his favorite drug, control. "Well then," Vivian's voice turned sultry, "I'll make sure to wear something that really twists the knife. That red Valentino perhaps? The one that costs more than she probably makes in 6 months? Perfect. And Vivian?" Marcus's smile was cold enough to frost glass. "Make sure the photographers get good angles. I want evidence of tonight preserved forever." As he ended the call, Marcus walked to his study, a monument to masculine power decorated with awards, photographs with politicians and celebrities, and the mounted head of a lion he'd killed on safari, much like how he'd hunted and killed Sarah's spirit. He pulled open the mahogany drawer of his desk and retrieved a folder marked Sarah Final Solution. Inside were printed emails, financial records, and a detailed psychological profile prepared by a private investigator. Every aspect of Sarah's current life was documented with clinical precision. The cramped apartment in the rundown part of town. The second-hand car that barely ran. The series of dead-end jobs she'd taken just to survive. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment that had drained what little savings she might have had. Marcus spread the papers across his desk like a general planning a military campaign. According to his investigator's latest report, Sarah worked 3 part-time jobs: morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoons doing data entry for a small accounting firm, and evenings cleaning office buildings. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms now scrubbed toilets for minimum wage. 18-hour days, 7 days a week, he murmured, reading the surveillance notes. Living paycheck to paycheck, behind on rent, driving a car held together with prayer and duct tape. Perfect. The folder contained photographs too, grainy shots taken with a telephoto lens showing Sarah's transformation over the past 5 years. Gone was the confident woman in designer suits who had once stood beside him at charity galas. In her place was someone hollow-eyed and thin, her once lustrous black hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes purchased from discount stores. The investigator had even documented her routine. Sarah left her apartment each morning at 4:30 a.m., returned after midnight, and spent her one day off each month visiting her ailing mother in a state-funded nursing facility. Marcus closed the folder with a satisfied snap. The invitation he'd sent 3 weeks ago had been a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Written on his personal letterhead, it had arrived at Sarah's apartment with all the pomp of a royal summons. My dearest Sarah, time has a way of putting things in perspective. I find myself reflecting on our shared past and wondering if we might find a way to heal old wounds. I would be honored if you would join me for dinner this Saturday at 8. Consider it an olive branch, a chance for us both to find peace. Your devoted friend, Marcus. He'd had Vivian proofread it, and she'd nearly choked on her champagne laughing. Devoted friend? Oh, Marcus, you're absolutely evil. She'll think you're trying to apologize. And that was exactly what he was counting on. Sarah's one weakness had always been her belief in redemption, her foolish faith that people could change. She would come tonight expecting contrition, perhaps even hoping for some form of closure. Instead, she would find herself trapped in a room full of the same society vultures who had turned their backs on her when Marcus destroyed her reputation. The guest list for tonight's intimate dinner read like a who's who of the city's most influential families. The Blackwells, who controlled the largest media empire on the West Coast. The Ashfords, whose political connections reached all the way to Washington. The Chen family, tech moguls who could make or break careers with a single phone call. Every person attending tonight had been carefully selected for maximum social impact. Marcus had spent weeks planting seeds in conversations, letting slip that his poor ex-wife would be joining them, how he was trying to help her get back on her feet. The implication was clear: Sarah would be attending as a charity case, a former society wife reduced to begging for scraps from her successful ex-husband's table. Sir? The voice belonged to James, his longtime butler, a man whose discretion was worth its weight in gold. The florists have finished with the arrangements, and the caterers are requesting final approval for the wine pairings. Marcus glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, 6:15 p.m. Tell them to proceed with the 82 Bordeaux for the main course. And James? He looked up with predatory eyes. When Mrs. Martinez arrives, I want her shown in through the servants' entrance. Tell the staff it's for privacy. James's expression didn't flicker, though something like distaste briefly shadowed his features. In his 40 years of service to wealthy families, he'd witnessed many cruelties, but this felt particularly cold-blooded. Of course, sir. And shall I have her coat taken to the back closet? No. Have it hung in the main closet with the guests' coats. I want everyone to see it, whatever discount store purchase she's wearing, next to their designer pieces. Every detail matters tonight, James. As the butler withdrew, Marcus returned to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere across the city, Sarah was probably getting ready, maybe borrowing a dress from a friend or searching through thrift stores for something appropriate. The thought of her struggling to find something dignified to wear filled him with dark satisfaction. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Darling, just finished at the salon. I look absolutely devastating. This poor woman won't know what hit her. See you at 7:30. XOXO. Marcus smiled, but it was the smile of a shark sending blood in the water. He walked to his bedroom, where his tuxedo hung waiting like a suit of armor. Tonight wasn't just about humiliating Sarah, it was about sending a message to everyone who might dare to challenge him in the future. Cross Marcus Rodriguez, and he wouldn't just ruin you once. He'd make sure you stayed ruined forever. As he dressed, Marcus allowed himself to savor the anticipation. He imagined Sarah's face when she realized the true nature of tonight's gathering. The moment when the conversation would turn to how brave she was for surviving her circumstances. The carefully orchestrated sympathy that would cut deeper than any outright cruelty. The gradual understanding that she'd been invited not as a guest, but as entertainment. By 7 p.m., the mansion was transformed into a stage set for social execution. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Candles flickered in crystal holders. The dining room table, capable of seating 20, was set for an intimate gathering of 8, just the right number for word of tonight's events to spread through their social circle like wildfire by tomorrow morning. The first guests arrived promptly at 7:30. Elizabeth Blackwell glided through the door in a gown that cost more than Sarah's annual rent, followed by her husband Richard, whose media empire could make or break reputations with a single news cycle. The Ashfords arrived next, Senator Patricia Ashford resplendent in diamonds that caught the light like stars, her husband Charles adjusting his senatorial cufflinks with practiced authority. Marcus. Elizabeth air-kissed him with the precision of a diplomatic negotiation. We're all simply dying to see your mysterious guest. You've been so secretive about this reunion. All will be revealed in due time, Marcus replied smoothly, accepting Senator Ashford's firm handshake. I think you'll all find tonight quite enlightening. Dr. Jennifer Chen and her husband David completed the guest roster, their combined net worth in the billions thanks to their revolutionary medical devices. They'd known Sarah during her marriage to Marcus, back when she'd been developing the preliminary algorithms that would later become the foundation of Marcus's most profitable ventures. I must admit, I'm curious about Sarah, Jennifer said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. It's been 5 years since anyone's seen her? I heard she completely disappeared from society. Disappeared is such a dramatic word, Marcus replied, his voice carefully modulated. Let's just say she's been finding herself. Tonight is about offering her a chance to reconnect with old friends. What Marcus didn't say, what he would never admit, was that Sarah's disappearance hadn't been as voluntary as he'd led people to believe. His systematic destruction of her reputation had been thorough and ruthless. Phone calls to former colleagues questioning her work ethic. Whispered suggestions that her contributions to their shared projects had been exaggerated. Legal maneuvers that tied up her access to intellectual property she'd helped develop. By the time their divorce was final, Sarah wasn't just financially ruined, she was professionally radioactive. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang with the Westminster chimes that announced important arrivals. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though his expression remained perfectly composed. This was it, the moment 5 years of planning would come to fruition. That must be our final guest, he announced to the assembled group, noting how they all turned toward the door with barely concealed curiosity. Please, don't let me interrupt your conversations. I'll just go welcome Sarah personally. But Marcus didn't go to the front door. Instead, he positioned himself where he could watch through the archway as James opened it, ready to savor Sarah's inevitable shock at the servant's entrance protocol. He'd instructed his security team to direct her car to the back of the house, the route typically reserved for caterers and maintenance staff. The small humiliation would set the tone perfectly for everything that followed. Through the window, he could see James walking toward the back entrance, and Marcus felt a familiar surge of power. This was how it began, with control over even the smallest details, with the ability to determine how someone entered his domain. Sarah would arrive confused, diminished, already off balance before she'd even seen the other guests. But something was wrong. James had stopped walking. In fact, he was standing perfectly still in the middle of the back courtyard, staring toward the service entrance with an expression Marcus had never seen before. The butler's usual composure had cracked, replaced by something that looked almost like amazement. Marcus frowned, moving closer to the window. From his angle, he couldn't see what had captured James's attention, but he could hear something unexpected, the low, throaty growl of a high-performance engine. Not just any engine, but the distinctive purr of serious European machinery. A Ferrari, maybe, or a Lamborghini. But that was impossible. None of his guests had arrived in anything that dramatic, and Sarah certainly didn't have access to. The thought died in his throat as a sleek, midnight black Ferrari 812 Superfast rounded the corner of his estate and pulled up to the servants' entrance. The car was worth more than most people's houses, its paint job so perfect it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But that was just the beginning of Marcus's confusion. The driver's door opened with the precise engineering click of Italian perfection, and a figure emerged that made Marcus's world tilt on its axis. The woman who stepped out of the Ferrari moved with the fluid confidence of someone who owned every room she entered. Her dress wasn't borrowed from a friend or purchased at a discount store, it was clearly couture, a midnight blue creation that hugged her figure with the precision only money could buy. Her hair, once pulled back in that tired ponytail his investigator had documented, now fell in elegant waves past her shoulders, professionally styled and gleaming with health. But it was her face that stopped Marcus's breath entirely. Gone was the hollow-eyed exhaustion his photographs had captured. In its place was something he hadn't seen in years, the confident radiance of the woman he'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, before power and control had poisoned everything between them. Sarah Martinez looked not just recovered, but transformed. She looked successful. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. And then the passenger door opened. A young boy stepped out, maybe 8 or 9 years old, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that matched his composed demeanor. He had Sarah's dark eyes, but there was something else in his features, something that made Marcus's blood run cold with a recognition he didn't want to accept. The boy walked around the car with the same confident stride as his mother, and Marcus caught a glimpse of his profile, the strong jawline, the way he held his shoulders, the precise way he adjusted his small tie. The second door opened, and another child emerged. This one was a girl, the same age as the boy, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Marcus had been spending on Sarah's surveillance. She had her mother's graceful movements but her father's determined chin, and when she looked up at the mansion, her expression was one of cool assessment rather than childish wonder. Twins. Marcus's legs felt weak as the mathematical certainty hit him like a physical blow. 8 or 9 years old. Born sometime after their divorce, when Sarah had disappeared from society. The boy's unmistakable features, the girl's defiant stance, both carrying genetic markers that Marcus recognized from his own mirror. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. These weren't just any children accompanying Sarah tonight. These were his children. His son and daughter, whose existence he'd never suspected, who'd been raised completely outside his knowledge or control. From the archway leading to the main hall, he could hear Vivian's voice calling sweetly, "Marcus, darling, is everything all right? Your guest seems to be taking her time." But Marcus couldn't respond. He was transfixed by the scene unfolding in his courtyard. Sarah was speaking quietly to the children, her voice too low for him to hear through the glass, but her body language spoke volumes. There was no nervousness, no hesitation. She was giving them instructions with the calm authority of someone completely in control of the situation. James had recovered from his initial shock and was approaching the unusual trio. Marcus watched his butler's face transform from confusion to something approaching respect as Sarah extended her hand in greeting. Whatever she was saying to James, it was having an immediate effect. The older man's posture straightened, and he gestured toward the front entrance, not the servants' entrance as instructed. "No, no, no," Marcus muttered, his carefully orchestrated humiliation already crumbling. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." Through the window, he watched Sarah nod graciously to James and then turn back to the Ferrari. But instead of locking it and walking away, she opened the trunk. Marcus's confusion deepened as she removed what appeared to be a briefcase, not the battered purse or cheap tote bag his investigators' reports had described, but a sleek leather attaché that screamed executive power. The children flanked her as she walked toward the house, and Marcus finally understood why James had redirected them to the front entrance. There was no universe in which this trio would be confused for charity cases arriving through the servants' door. They moved like royalty, carried themselves like people accustomed to being the most important individuals in any room they entered. And they were walking directly toward his front door. "Marcus?" Vivian's voice was closer now, tinged with curiosity. "Who's that arriving in the Ferrari? I thought you said." She appeared beside him at the window, and her words died mid-sentence as she took in the scene. For the first time since Marcus had known her, Vivian looked genuinely shaken. Marcus had planned this night for months. He had told everyone in their glittering social circle that his ex-wife Sarah had collapsed after their divorce, penniless, working 3 jobs, living in a shabby apartment just to survive. He invited her tonight not to welcome her back, but to destroy her publicly. He wanted his guests to see how thoroughly he had broken her. But when the front doors opened, silence rippled through the hall. Sarah walked in like royalty. Her midnight blue gown looked custom-made by Armani, her diamond jewelry caught the light with effortless power, and her hair gleamed in perfect waves. Beside her walked 2 children, Alexander and Isabella, poised, graceful, and unmistakably Marcus's. Their features mirrored his, but their confidence was all Sarah. They shook hands and curtsied with composure that left the guests stunned. Marcus felt the air shift as Sarah greeted the room like she owned it. Calmly, she revealed the truth. She was the founder and CEO of Meridian Analytics, a biotech company pioneering artificial intelligence for cancer detection. Their algorithm could identify malignant cellular changes 18 months before traditional screening. They had 17 patents, FDA fast-track approval, and a partnership with Johns Hopkins. Goldman Sachs projected their upcoming IPO at $12 billion. The guests, senators, venture capitalists, world-class scientists, leaned in, captivated. Marcus, once the center of this elite circle, was fading to the edges while Sarah became their new sun. Dr. Chen, one of the city's top medical researchers, listened in awe as 9-year-old Alexander casually discussed mathematical modeling for cellular mutation data, while Isabella explained her award-winning science project on biomimetic surgical materials. The twins had already earned early admissions to MIT and Stanford. Then Sarah quietly dismantled Marcus's carefully crafted lie. She revealed that while he was spreading stories of her downfall, she had been building her company in secret, working low-wage jobs only to hide her real work and raise untraceable capital. The investigator Marcus had hired? She had fed him false evidence, knowing he would only report what Marcus wanted to believe. Marcus hadn't uncovered her struggles, he had been watching a performance. In the most devastating revelation, Alexander and Isabella were his children, born after their divorce. He had abandoned them before they were even born, while Sarah built a global medical empire on her own. Finally, she placed a thick legal document on the table, a custody and support agreement. It stripped Marcus of all parental rights and obligations. If he refused to sign, Sarah warned, the media would learn that he had abandoned prodigy children while their mother revolutionized cancer diagnostics. Surrounded by his silent guests, now clearly on Sarah's side, Marcus's hands trembled as he signed away the last remnants of his power. Sarah thanked the guests graciously, accepted an offer to join a major philanthropic board, and swept out the door with her children flanking her like young royalty. The roar of her Ferrari faded into the night as the room stayed frozen in shock. By the time Marcus looked up, his world was already collapsing. His allies avoided his eyes. Invitations would stop arriving. Partnerships would dissolve. The man who had once ruled this world through arrogance and control now stood alone in the ruins of his reputation. Sarah had not returned for revenge, she had come to prove something much greater, that true strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about rising so high above them that they become irrelevant. Marcus had tried to write her ending. Instead, she had written her own legend, and left him as just a forgotten footnote in the story of her triumph. When you filed for divorce, Sarah continued, you made sure I couldn't access any of our shared intellectual property. But Marcus, you couldn't take away the knowledge in my head. You couldn't erase my understanding of the principles we'd developed together. You just prevented me from profiting from work that was partly mine. So you rebuilt everything from scratch. I improved everything from scratch. Do you know what happens when you force a brilliant woman to start over with nothing but her intelligence and determination? She creates something better than what she had before. Sarah's smile was radiant with triumph. Meridian Analytics isn't just successful, it's revolutionary. The diagnostic accuracy rates we've achieved exceed anything in the current market by orders of magnitude. Marcus's head was spinning as he tried to calculate the implications. Medical diagnostic companies with breakthrough technology could be valued in the billions. Sarah wasn't just successful, she was potentially one of the wealthiest women in the country. The IPO prospects alone, he began, are quite promising, according to Goldman Sachs. They're suggesting an initial valuation around $12 billion, though I suspect the market will drive that higher once our full capabilities are public knowledge. $12 billion. Marcus felt physically sick as the number registered. Sarah wasn't just wealthy, she was exponentially wealthier than he was. His net worth, which he'd always considered substantial, was a rounding error compared to her achievement. And the children are your heirs, he said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Alexander and Isabella will inherit a legacy of genuine innovation and social contribution. They're being raised to understand that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Sarah's voice carried the quiet pride of a mother who'd succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. They'll never need to tear others down to feel powerful. The criticism cut deep because it was accurate. Marcus had built his empire through acquisition and domination, buying competitors and crushing potential threats. Sarah had created something entirely new, something that would save lives and improve human health on a global scale. Can you believe this transformation? If you're loving Sarah's comeback, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what do you think her secret is? The truth is about to blow your mind even more. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. James's voice came through the door with careful discretion. Mr. Rodriguez, your guests are requesting your presence. They have some questions about the children's educational background. Marcus closed his eyes, imagining the scene waiting for him. His social circle, fascinated by the brilliant twins he'd never known existed, asking pointed questions about his role in their lives. The growing realization among his peers that he'd abandoned not just any children, but exceptionally gifted ones who were being raised by a woman of extraordinary accomplishment. We should return, Sarah said graciously. I don't want to keep our friends waiting. Our friends. Another perfectly calculated phrase that reminded everyone present of their shared history while highlighting Marcus's failure to maintain relationships that Sarah had effortlessly reclaimed. They walked back to the main hall together, and Marcus was struck by how natural Sarah looked in his house. She moved through the familiar spaces with the confidence of someone who belonged, while he felt like a stranger in his own home. The conversation in the main hall ceased abruptly as they appeared. Marcus caught the tail end of Isabella's explanation about her brother's work with predictive modeling applications in pharmaceutical development, delivered to an increasingly amazed Dr. Chen. Ah, there you are, Senator Ashford said with the smooth diplomacy that had made him successful in politics. Sarah, your children have been telling us about their academic pursuits. Quite remarkable for one so young. They've had excellent opportunities, Sarah replied modestly. Private tutoring, access to university research programs, internships at leading technology firms. When you're in a position to provide the best possible education, it's really a moral obligation to do so. The words were ostensibly humble, but they contained multiple layers of implication. Sarah was wealthy enough to afford the best education money could buy. She was connected enough to arrange university programs and corporate internships for children. And she was morally committed to her children's development in ways that Marcus, by implication, was not. Elizabeth Blackwell, who'd been unusually quiet since Sarah's arrival, finally found her voice. Sarah, I hope you don't mind a personal question, but we've all been wondering about your business ventures. When did you first realize you had an aptitude for medical technology? The question was a trap, though perhaps not intentionally. Any answer that referenced Sarah's work during her marriage to Marcus would highlight his role in suppressing her contributions. Any answer that ignored their shared history would allow him to claim credit for her current success. Sarah navigated the minefield with surgical precision. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of mathematics and biology, she said. During my marriage, I had opportunities to explore those interests theoretically. But it wasn't until I was on my own that I could pursue practical applications without competing priorities. Competing priorities. A delicate way of saying that Marcus had prevented her from developing her own professional identity while they were married. Dr. Chen leaned forward with professional curiosity. The algorithms you've developed, the theoretical foundation must be incredibly sophisticated. How did you approach the problem of pattern recognition in cellular imagery? Well, Sarah said, settling into her element, the key insight was that traditional imaging analysis was looking for deviations from normal patterns. But cancer development follows its own internal logic. Instead of looking for abnormalities, we developed algorithms that could recognize the early stages of malignant organization. She was speaking at a level that was clearly beyond most of the room's comprehension, but Dr. Chen's eyes were lighting up with understanding and excitement. That's revolutionary. You're not just detecting cancer, you're detecting the preconditions that lead to cancer development. Exactly. By the time most cancers are visible to conventional screening, they've been developing for months or years. Our technology can identify cellular changes that predict malignant transformation up to 18 months in advance. The conversation had shifted entirely away from social pleasantries to cutting-edge medical research. Marcus watched his carefully planned evening slip completely beyond his control as Sarah effortlessly dominated the intellectual discussion. Alexander, who'd been listening intently to his mother's explanation, spoke up. "Mom, should we tell them about the collaboration with Johns Hopkins?" Sarah smiled indulgently. "I suppose it's not confidential anymore. We're launching a joint research program with Johns Hopkins Medical School next year. They're providing access to their patient database, and we're providing our diagnostic technology. The goal is to screen their entire patient population for early-stage cancer indicators." Senator Ashford whistled softly. "The political implications alone, if you can demonstrate population-level early detection. The mortality reduction could be unprecedented," Dr. Chen finished. "Sarah, you're talking about fundamentally changing how we approach cancer treatment. This isn't just a business venture, it's a public health revolution." Marcus felt himself becoming invisible in his own house as the conversation swirled around medical breakthroughs, research partnerships, and social impact initiatives. These weren't topics he could contribute to meaningfully, and everyone in the room seemed to recognize Sarah as the authority figure. Vivian, who'd been growing increasingly agitated as the evening progressed, finally exploded with frustrated desperation. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We're all acting like Sarah is some kind of genius inventor, but let's be honest about what's really happening here. She's obviously exaggerating her role in these developments. No one goes from cleaning toilets to medical breakthrough technology in 5 years." The room went silent with shocked embarrassment. Vivian had just committed the ultimate social error. She'd revealed her complete misunderstanding of the evening's dynamics while simultaneously insulting not just Sarah, but the intelligence of everyone present. Isabella, who'd been quietly observing the adult interactions, spoke with the devastating honesty that only children possess. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I think there might be some confusion. Mom never cleaned toilets. She's a computer scientist with advanced degrees in biomedical engineering and artificial intelligence. She was conducting market research at those buildings, not working as a janitor." The correction was delivered with such polite certainty that it made Vivian's outburst look not just rude, but factually ignorant. A 9-year-old had just embarrassed Marcus's current wife by demonstrating superior understanding of the situation. Alexander, not to be outdone by his sister, added his own observation. "Also, 5 years is actually a pretty normal timeline for biotechnology development. Mom's been working on diagnostic algorithms since before we were born. She just finally had the freedom to commercialize her research. Since before we were born." The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah had been developing revolutionary medical technology while married to Marcus, but had only been able to profit from it after their divorce freed her from his controlling influence. Marcus looked around the room and saw his social assassination complete. Every face reflected the same understanding. He'd systematically suppressed his wife's extraordinary talents, abandoned his brilliant children, and spent 5 years congratulating himself for destroying a woman who'd actually used his betrayal as motivation to achieve something genuinely remarkable. I think, Senator Ashford said carefully, we've all learned something important tonight about the dangers of underestimating people. The comment was diplomatically phrased, but everyone understood its real meaning. Marcus had been revealed as a fool who'd thrown away a partnership with one of the most innovative minds of their generation. Sarah, sensing the moment was right for her final move, opened her briefcase again and removed a thick legal document. Actually, there is one more matter we should discuss while we're all here, she said with casual authority. Marcus, I have something that belongs to you. She placed the document on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The cover page was clearly visible, Custody and Support Agreement Martinez v. Rodriguez. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Sarah, what is this? A legal formality, really. Since our children are now old enough to have expressed their preferences clearly, and since you've demonstrated limited interest in their welfare, this document officially terminates any potential future claims you might have had to custody or visitation rights. She flipped to a marked page, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow. In exchange, you're relieved of any child support obligations, past or future. I think we can all agree that Alexander and Isabella have been adequately provided for without your financial assistance. The document was a masterpiece of legal humiliation. Sarah was publicly demonstrating that she didn't need or want anything from Marcus, not his money, not his involvement in their children's lives, not even his acknowledgement of their existence. The children's trust funds are fully endowed, she continued conversationally, as though discussing the weather. They'll attend Stanford and MIT respectively, they've already been accepted to their early admission programs. Their futures are secure regardless of any decisions you might make. Early admission to Stanford and MIT. At 9 years old, Marcus felt his knees buckle as the full scope of his children's capabilities registered. These weren't just bright kids, they were genuine prodigies being raised by a woman who understood how to nurture exceptional talent. All that's required is your signature, Sarah said, placing an expensive pen beside the documents. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to contest custody. Though I should mention that any such proceedings would necessarily involve extensive media coverage, given my company's public profile. The threat was elegantly delivered but absolutely clear. If Marcus tried to claim parental rights now, Sarah would destroy him publicly. The same media attention that would celebrate her revolutionary medical technology would crucify him for abandoning his children for nearly a decade. Marcus stared at the documents, understanding that signing them would formalize his complete defeat while refusing to sign would trigger an even more public humiliation. Take your time, Sarah said graciously. Though I should mention that we have an early flight tomorrow. The children have a robotics competition at MIT next weekend, and they hate to miss school. Of course they did. Marcus's children, the heirs he'd never known existed, were competing in robotics competitions at one of the world's most prestigious universities while still in elementary school. With trembling hands, Marcus signed the documents. Each signature felt like another nail in the coffin of his self-respect, but he had no choice. Sarah had outplayed him so completely that resistance would only make his humiliation worse. Wonderful, Sarah said, collecting the papers with the satisfaction of someone completing a successful business transaction. I think that concludes our business for the evening. She stood gracefully, and the children immediately moved to flank her. The three of them looked like a complete family unit, successful and confident and entirely self-sufficient. Thank you all for such a lovely evening, Sarah said to the assembled guests. It's been delightful reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. Dr. Chen, I'll have my assistant contact you about the research collaboration we discussed. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth Blackwell stood impulsively. Sarah, I hope you'll consider joining our foundation's board. We could use someone with your expertise and vision. I'd be honored, Sarah replied. Though I should mention that my priorities tend toward projects with direct social impact rather than traditional charity work. Another perfectly calculated response that positioned her as more socially conscious than the room's other philanthropists while graciously accepting their invitation. The family moved toward the door with the same confident grace they displayed upon arrival. But at the threshold, Alexander turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Rodriguez," the boy said with devastating politeness, "thank you for inviting us tonight. I hope someday you'll be proud of the work Mom is doing to help people." The words were ostensibly kind, but they contained a killing judgment. Marcus's own son had just suggested that his father's approval was irrelevant to their family's meaningful achievements. And then they were gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Sarah's perfume and the sound of a Ferrari engine disappearing into the night. The silence in the main hall was deafening. Marcus looked around at his guests, his former friends, and saw the calculation happening behind their eyes. By tomorrow morning, invitations to future social gatherings would mysteriously fail to arrive. Business partnerships would be quietly dissolved. The social and professional network he'd spent decades building would evaporate as people repositioned themselves around Sarah's rising star. Senator Ashford was the first to speak. "Well, Marcus, that was certainly educational. I had no idea you had such accomplished children." The past tense wasn't accidental. Had such accomplished children. Not have. The senator was already mentally rewriting Marcus's relationship to his own family. Dr. Chen gathered her coat with obvious enthusiasm. "I really must go. I have research proposals to review, and Sarah's work opens up some fascinating possibilities." One by one, his guests made polite excuses and departed, each carrying the story of Marcus's downfall to share with their own social circles. By morning, his humiliation would be complete and public. Vivian was the last to speak, her voice shrill with panic and rage. "Marcus, we have to do something. We can't just let her destroy everything we've built." Marcus looked at his current wife, young, beautiful, and utterly lacking in the intellectual depth he'd spent years diminishing in Sarah. For the first time, he saw Vivian clearly, a trophy acquisition designed to make him feel powerful rather than a partner capable of challenging him to grow. "There's nothing to do," he said quietly. "Sarah didn't destroy what we built. She revealed what we actually were." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the estate in pristine white. But inside the Rodriguez mansion, the stains of truth and consequences could never be washed clean. And somewhere across the city, in a house with a better view than his own, Sarah Martinez was tucking her children into bed and reading them stories about courage, perseverance, and the power of never giving up on yourself. If this story inspired you to never give up on yourself, make sure you're subscribed for more stories of justice and redemption. Drop a comment below sharing your own comeback story or what gave you strength during tough times. Remember, your current situation is not your final destination. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about revenge, it's about rising above those who tried to break you. Sarah didn't win because she wanted to hurt Marcus. She won because she refused to let his actions define her worth. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't anger, it's success. When someone tries to write your ending, grab the pen and write your own comeback story. The people who underestimate you today might just become the audience for your triumph tomorrow. ICKO short form main writer K-Do.